The mail-order bride was supposed to arrive at dawn, the way the letter promised, the way Ezra Cole had circled on his calendar with a piece of charcoal weeks ago, counting the days the same way a man counts heartbeats when he's been alone too long. And when the sun rose pale over the Wyoming plains and the dust roads stayed empty, Ezra told himself wagons ran late, horses tired, weather turned, anything but what his gut already whispered. Because Ezra Cole had buried too many hopes in this land to pretend he didn't recognize the shape of another grave forming, and as the hours stretched and the wind dragged its fingers through the dry grass, like it was searching for bones, Ezra stood by the fence line with his hat pulled low, eyes fixed on the horizon, remembering the careful handwriting of Clara May Henson, the woman who had written about wanting a quiet life, about believing a good man could still be found west of the Mississippi, about how she wasn't afraid of hard work or lonely nights as long as someone waited for her at the end of them. And Ezra had waited, God help him. He had waited longer than he'd waited for anything in his life, longer than he'd waited for rain, longer than he'd waited for wounds to heal, longer than he'd waited for the ache in his chest to dull after his parents died and the ranch became a silence that spoke louder than voices ever had. And when noon came and went and still no wagon appeared, Ezra saddled his horse without thinking, the motion muscle-deep and automatic, because men like him didn't sit and hope when something felt wrong. They followed the feeling until it either killed them or told them the truth. And as he rode east along the rutted trail the mail wagons used, the land unfolded its familiar cruelty. Sunburned hills, dry creek beds, scattered stones sharp enough to split hooves, and then, miles out, the smell reached him before the sight did. That unmistakable tang of broken wood, churned earth, and something darker beneath it. And when he crested a low rise, he saw it. Splintered wagon wheels like snapped ribs, canvas torn and flapping weakly, crates scattered across the ground as if flung by an angry hand. And Ezra reined in hard, heart pounding, because this wasn't delay, this was disaster, and he dismounted slowly, gun already in his hand, eyes scanning for movement, for bandits, wolves, anything. But there was only silence, the kind that pressed against your ears, and he moved through the wreckage piece by piece, finding a trunk cracked open with women's clothes spilling out, lace and cotton dragged through the dirt, a broken mirror, letters scattered and trampled. And when he saw Clara's name on one envelope, his breath caught like he'd been punched, and he dropped to his knees without caring how it looked, gathering the papers as if they were pieces of her herself, whispering her name out loud for the first time, tasting it like a promise and a prayer. And that's when he saw the tracks leading. Away from the wreckage, drag marks, boot prints that weren't careful, weren't gentle, and something lighter alongside them, footprints that staggered, that slipped, that told a story no man ever wanted to read, and Ezra followed them, rage building with every step, every broken twig, every smear of blood he tried not to see but couldn't look away from. And the trail led him into a shallow ravine where the wind died and the air turned cold, and there, beneath an overhang of stone, he found her Clara May Henson, barely conscious, clothes torn, skin pale against the dirt, eyes fluttering open just long enough to focus on his face. And when she tried to speak, no sound came out, only a breath that trembled like a leaf in a storm. And Ezra dropped beside her, gun forgotten, hands shaking as he wrapped her in his coat, his voice breaking as he promised her she was safe now, that he had her, that he wasn't going anywhere. And if you've made it this far into this story, if your heart is beating a little harder right now, remember this. Stories like this don't come to life without listeners like you. So take a moment to subscribe, because what happens next will change everything. Ezra carried her through the ravine like she weighed nothing, though every step felt heavier than the last. Not because of her body, but because of the truth settling into his bones that the world had almost taken the one thing he dared to hope for. And when he reached his horse, he lifted her gently, cradling her against his chest as if she might shatter if he breathed too hard, riding back toward the ranch, with the sun sinking low and guilt gnawing at him for every mile. She'd suffered alone. And when he laid her in his bed, cleaned her wounds with hands steadier than his heart, and fed her water drop by careful drop, Clara finally spoke, her voice a whisper threaded with pain, telling him about the men who'd stopped the wagon, about how the driver ran and left them, about how she fought until she couldn't stand. And Ezra listened without interrupting, jaw clenched so tight it ached, because men like him understood violence too well to pretend surprise. And when she finished, he told her his name, told her she was home, and something in her eyes softened, not with relief alone but recognition, like she'd known him already through ink and paper. And days passed as she healed, slow and fragile. Ezra sleeping in a chair by her door, bringing her meals, speaking little but always listening. And in that quiet, something stronger than words grew between them, something forged not from romance but survival. And when Clara finally stood on the porch and looked out over the land, she didn't see emptiness the way others might have. She saw space to breathe, and Ezra saw her not as a promise delivered late, but as a woman who had endured and chosen to stay anyway. And when he tracked down the men responsible, when justice came hard and final under a red Wyoming sky, it wasn't vengeance that filled him. It was resolve, because protecting something precious gives a man a reason sharper than anger ever could. And months later, when Clara laughed for the first time without flinching, when the ranch filled with warmth instead of silence, Ezra understood that love wasn't about how someone arrived, but about who stayed when the world tried to tear them away. And if this story moved you, if you want more tales of resilience, love, and survival carved from the hardest places, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because the next story is already waiting just beyond the horizon.